Hello, welcome back to the math wall, and this week we're going to be doing a little bit of a larger number. So this time I have the 100 number, so the number is 132. So we're going to start off with that today. And when we do our 100, when we have 100 in a number, we're actually going to make a large square. And then we have 3 tens. And we have 2 ones. And then we find our pairs to determine or to find out if our number is odd or even. So in our ones, we have 1 even pair, so that means that the number is even. Alright, moving on. Now remember, as we go through, to stop and pause as you need to complete that. So moving on, we're going using the number 132. We're at our hundreds, tens, and ones. So the number 132, we do have 100 this time, so we're going to put a 1 in the 100 spot. How many tens do we have in 132? We have 3 tens. And how many ones do we have in the number 132? 2 ones. Now, I always like to go back and make sure that we have our drawings that match it. So we have our 100. Then we have 3 tens, which are 3 longs, and then our 2 ones. Now using our same number, 132, we're going to write that in expanded form. So right now, take a moment, pause, if you have to, so you can see if you can write out expanded form with 132. So if you've done it, this is what it should look like. 100 plus, because we have 100, one of the hundreds. We have 3 tens, so let's count what 3 tens is equal to. Counting by tens, 10, 20, 30. So 3 tens is the same as 30. So 100 plus 30 plus 2 ones. So that's just a 2. So our math equation should say 100 plus 30 plus 2 equals 132. Alright, taking that chart, and we're going to move into our minus 10 plus 10 minus 1 plus 1. So on this chart, I always do start with the minus and the plus. So what I like to do when I start introducing with 100, if you need to, you just use your chart, you find the number 32, and you're just going to put 100 in front of that. So then just around the other numbers, you could put 100 if you need that help. So we're going to find 132 minus 10, and we're going to be just focusing on that 10 spot and noticing that the 100 stays the same and the 1 stay the same. So we're at 132. We have 3 tens, we said. We're going to take a 10 away. So we're going to have a 2 in the 10 spot. So the 100 stays the same. The 1s stay the same. And like we said, we had those 3 tens. We're taking a 10 away. And now we have 2 tens. So 132 minus 10 equals 122. So noticing I'm lining them up so I can see which number changed. We notice that the 10 spot is the only one that changed because we're working with 10, minus 10. Now we're going to go to plus 10. So just with 132, we're going to keep the hundreds the same because we're not talking about hundreds. We're going to keep the ones the same because we're not talking about ones. We're talking about tens. So we had 3 tens. We're going to add another 10. So now we're going to have 4 tens. So 132 plus 10 more is 142. Now we're going to move on to 132 minus 1. So we see 1, we're focusing on the 1 spot. So we're going to move that 100 over. We're going to keep the tens the same as well. So we had 2 ones. We're going to take 1 away, and we're going to have 1, 1. So 132 minus 1 equals 131. Then we're going to go to 132 plus 1. So once again, we keep the hundreds the same, the 100. We're keeping the 3 tens the same, and we're only going to add one more to the ones. So we had 2 ones, we're going to add one more 1, and now we have 3 ones. Moving on to missing number. So on this part, I want you to just pause the screen and solve them. And I'll give you time to do that. And then I'll come in and I'll finish them right up. Alright, so if you forget how to do the missing number, we always start with the larger number, the 9. So I have 9. I am going to take away 3. 1, 2, 3. And I have 6 left over. So 3 plus 6 equals 9. I'm going to do the other two quickly because you should have paused the video to complete them. So we have 5 plus 4 equals 9 and 2 plus 7 equals 9. Moving on to balance both sides. So remember, when you're doing balance both sides, you're solving the first equation and finding what that equals and putting it here. Then you're finding another equation that makes the same amount on both sides so that they're equal and balanced. So pause it and solve that now. So 4 plus 3 equals 7. And like I've done in some of my other videos, I'm just going to keep doing that reversal for extra practice. So we have that 3 plus 4. So we're just changing their spots. We're just changing their spots so it doesn't change anything. The same numbers are being used just in different spots when we're adding. So 3 plus 4 equals 7 as well. So they are balanced on both sides. 7 equals 7. That is true. Moving on to fact family. So pause the video. Our numbers today would be 9, 10, and 19. Complete the 2 adding equations and the 2 subtraction equations. And if you've completed the video, or completed the board, when you pause the video, I'm going to fill them in. 9 plus 10, we're taking the 2 smaller numbers to equal 19, the larger number, part, whole. And then we're just going to do the reversals of 10 plus 9 equals 19. And then when we do the subtraction, we always start with the whole number or the bigger number out of the 3, which is the 19. And then we subtract a part to get the other part. And then on the other subtraction, we're going to do 19, starting with that whole number, subtracting the other part, which is 10, and 19 minus 10 equals 9. Now, with this whole part, I did it a little bit different than I've done in the other videos. So this time I gave you the 2 parts, which you have to find to get the whole. So to do this, we could take the 2 parts and we could put it into our adding equation. 10 plus 8. So what does 10 plus 8 equal? And the answer is 18. So that's how we got our whole is 18. So now that we've filled in those, we can come over to our subtraction side. We use the whole number, 18. And then you can choose either of the parts. I will choose the 10. So I'm going to subtract 18 minus 10 to get the leftover 8 ones. Moving on to greater than, less than, or equal. So pause it and then complete so you can come back and I will fill them in. Okay, so let's go through this. I always touch the tens first. And I'm noticing 2 tens are in 25 and 5 tens are in 52. So 5 tens is greater than 25. So the way we read this though, we read from left to right. 25 is less than 52. Go to our next one. We touch the tens. After we see 1 10 and 13, 1 10 and 11, we're going to jump to the ones. So we move both those fingers over. We have 3 ones in 13, 1 1 in 11. 3 ones are greater than 1 1. So our alligator wants the bigger number. So the way we read this is 13 is greater than 11. Moving on, we have 8 tens in 82, 2 tens in 28. 8 tens is greater. So 82 is greater than 28. Put them in order. So let's see if you can do this on your own, and then you can check yours with me. So do those now. And pause the video. Okay, so today I'm going to do this a little bit different than using the 120 chart. I'm going to look at the numbers and kind of use our tens and ones now to help us understand. So I see I have 14, 36, 7, 11. Well, right away I notice that one of the numbers, 7, does not have any tens. So that has to be the smallest number. It has a 0 in the 10 spot or nothing. So 7 is going to be our smallest number. So we're going to put that one first and Xing off as we go. 14, I see 1 10. 36, I see 3 tens. And 11, I see 1 10. So that's kind of the same with the 14. So I'm going to jump over. I see the tens are the same. Then I'm going to go to the ones. In the ones, 11 only has 1, and 14 has 4 ones. So I'm going to pick the 11 is smaller. When we're putting them in order, we're going from smallest to largest. So I'm going to take that 11. And then, once again, I look, okay, 1 10 in the 14, 3 tens are in 36. 14 is smaller than 36, so that's going to go first. And 36 is our leftover, and we already identified that has the greater amount of tens, the bigger tens, so we're going to have that one at the end. So that was just another strategy to use in case you don't have the 120 chart. You can just go through, just like the tens and ones, how we have done in greater than, less than, and equal to. Now we're moving into our shapes. So pause the video and complete this now. Alright, so we're going to start with our circle. Remember, the bottom number is telling us how many to cut it into, which is 4. Equal pieces, equal. That's very important. They have to be equal, or as equal as possible. And then we're going to color in 2 of those. So we colored in 2/4 of the circle. Then moving on to the rectangle, we're going to cut this into 4 pieces. And we're going to color in that 3 of those pieces, 3 of the 4. 1, 2, 3. We have colored in 3/4 of the rectangle. And moving on to our clock. So, when looking at a clock, we have to always remember which one are we starting with. Are we starting with the smaller one or the larger one? And we're starting with the smaller hand. The smaller hand is called the, I hope you said hour hand. So we're always starting with the hour first. So this is our hour spot. When the hour hand points to the number, that's the number we're going to write. And it's pointing at the 7. So we're going to write 7. And then, what is the larger hand called? The longer one. It's the minutes. And when the minute hand is pointing at the 12, we're going to write 00. So 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. Moving on to our data chart. I'm going to look at this real quick. We have our circles, our triangles, and our squares. So I always like to put the number above and just really make a deep line there so we know where it's at. It's just easier for me to see the numbers as I go through. Alright, so we have 6 circles, 7 triangles, and 4 squares. So going into our questions, we want to know how many more triangles than circles. So before we ever do anything or solve the problem, we have to first decide, are we adding or subtracting? And then why? How many more triangles than circles? So what are we going to be doing? Are we adding or subtracting? subtracting. And how do we know we're subtracting? Because we see that more than. When you see that than, you're going to be comparing or finding the difference. And when you find the difference, you subtract. So when we subtract, we must always find which one has the larger amount to start off with. So let's go back to our chart. We're only focusing on triangle and circle. So on our chart, we notice that there are 7 triangles and 6 circles. So 7 is larger, so we're going to start with that. 7 minus 6 equals solve. And you should have gotten there's one more triangle than circle. Which has more, triangle or square? So this one has a 2-step problem. We have to first figure out which one has more, triangle or square. And we notice that triangle does have more. So we always circle that one there. Then we have to, once again, are we adding or subtracting, and how do we know? So we see that which has more again. Which has more, triangle or is telling us we're kind of trying to figure out the difference between both of these. So what's the difference? So that means we are going to subtract. And we're going to start with that triangle first. And we said there's 7 triangles. And if you forget, there's 4 squares. So our equation is going to say 7 minus 4 equals solve. And there are 3 more triangles than squares. All right, let's move on to our next problems with our chart. So we have how many fewer squares than circles? So once again, we're seeing fewer and the word than. What does that tell us to do? Subtract. And then we have to figure out which is the smaller number. Is it going to be the square or the circles? Let's look. Square has 4, circles has 6. So 6 is the larger number, so we're going to be starting with the 6. 6 minus 4. What's 6 minus 4? Solve. And the answer is there are 2 fewer squares than circles. Moving on to our next problem. It says how many circles and squares? What does that and tell us? How many circles and squares? So in my head, I picture I'm putting the circles and the squares to figure out those together. So that and is telling me I'm going to be adding. I'm going to be using my plus. I'm going to be combining them, putting them together. So I'm going to look at my chart again. And once again, I'm only focusing on the circles and the squares. So once again, we have 6 circles, 4 squares. We're going to add those together. And do that now. And the answer is 10. It's a 10 fact. Moving on to our last question. It says how many in all? And in all tells us to add. So we're going to add all the numbers. So we're going to add 6 plus 7 plus 4. Remember, when you're adding, you can move these around. So of the above problem, we noticed that 6 plus 4 made that 10. So I'm going to move these around just to find that 10 faster. And then I see the 10 here. And then everything comes down. And you can solve. And the answer is 17. Thank you so much for joining for the Math Walk. Come back tomorrow. Bye.